I'm going to call the Ione City Council meeting for Tuesday, November 19th, 2019 to order and ask you to join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call.
Here. Here.
Here.
Here.
Here. And approval of agenda.
I move we approve the agenda as written.
I'll second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Presentations, announcement, proclamations, and this proclamation is not going to be read this evening, is that what I understand? It's just, has this been given to the public?
No, but I have extra copies.
Okay, so it's basically it's a copy of the proclamation that we're going to be reading on Thursday night, so if you want a copy, just see Janice and she can get it for you.
Probably should mention the date and time for
Oh.
the event too.
Thank you. Well, here's how old he is. Let's see, November 21, no, that's not it.
Yeah, it's November 21st, 7 p.m. at Fire Station 2.
Oh, they did it on his birthday.
Oh, it's his birthday. I was going to say, it's the wrong year. Okay. Somebody really goofed up here. Okay. All right, so moving on, public comment. Each speaker is limited to 4 minutes. Anybody who wish to address the City Council at this time on matters pertaining to the City Council which are not on the agenda? Seeing none, we'll move on to the consent calendar. Okay, can I ask a question to council? Since this is more than 1 minute, some of the council members were not present. For one of them, can they still vote on the package?
If they've reviewed
Oh.
the minutes. If they've reviewed the minutes, they can. If they haven't, then they have to recuse themselves. So you have to break them up into two separate
Okay.
actions.
I reviewed them. That gives me comfort.
I reviewed them.
I reviewed them.
Anybody like
I
to
was
make a
here at the
motion?
meeting,
So
so
there you go. Well,
I get a star.
I'll entertain a motion.
I think you got to take public comment on consent.
Oh, I think I do. Public comment on the consent calendar. And my term is almost over and I still haven't got this down.
Then I'll make a motion to approve the consent calendar.
Second it.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? No public hearing this evening. Regular agenda, item number 3, adoption of resolution number 2019-39, declaring certain properties as surplus.
Excuse me. Yes, Mr. Mayor, Council. As you recall at our last meeting, staff brought before you 5 pieces of property that could have been considered to be surplus. After discussion, council recommended that the city only surplus 3 of those properties. One property located on Sutter Lane and identified as Casaview Drive. The second property is located on Fairway Drive and is identified by the APN number that's in the staff report and is next to Perry Earl Park. And the third property is located on Shapey Drive and is identified by the APN number, and it is by the 14th, it's the 4th tee off by the golf course. Staff has modified the resolution as requested, and staff has met with the property appraiser who is currently conducting the appraisals of the properties. Hopefully we will have those back in time for the next council meeting.
Discussion?
Sounds good.
Public comment? I have one question, and I think I know the answer, but I just want to clarify. So the property on Sutter Lane, that's just the unimproved property. It does not include that stub of a street that leads up to the property, correct?
There would be the access point there, so what I envision is that, you know, follow the curb line between the two properties on both sides, and that's where the easternmost terminus of that property would be, so it's all consistent.
I'm a little confused about east there.
So,
So there's about I don't know, 20-foot section of roadway.
right.
The roadway is not included in the,
Well, but again, there's that apron
Right.
thing, so if you take the curb line
right,
on both sides of the property and draw a straight line through, that would be included in terms of the surplus property.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
yes,
Okay.
that was my question.
Okay.
So they could basically tear up the asphalt from the existing roadway and then turn it into their front yard, whatever.
But they would need to put in the curb,
Yes, correct.
Extend the sidewalk.
and the
Sidewalks.
sidewalk and everything else to make it in terms of the character, or similar to the character of the other properties.
And just to make sure that that's reflected in the actual
That-
property thing.
That will be.
Description. It will be, okay.
It will be. Like I said, right now, we're just at the appraisal phase of when we start laying all the details out again, that needs to come back to council.
Okay. Yeah, because I have to make sure that that's included in the property. It'd be silly to have a driveway road right in the middle of your most of your property be a road. That'd be nice.
Yeah.
Easy to clean, I guess. But
Lori, did you have a
May
comment?
I just wanted to ask a question. I guess I thought I knew which lot it was. I checked on those others, but not on this one. The lot, John, that is at the corner almost of Vista and Pleasant Valley, that goes all the way through to Sutter Lane, that's not a city lot?
No, that's not the one we're talking about.
That's not the one we're talking
I know
about.
the one you are talking about, but I guess I thought that one was a city property too.
That
It
is
is.
correct, that is a city
You're not
property.
selling that.
No, because there is a water line, I think it's a water line that.
it's a water line easement that goes through.
Our sewer-
It's a
water-
it's a water line, I believe.
Water line, okay, that runs through there.
Yeah, this one here was just, it was the entrance to the old dairy, I understand, and there were just a couple poles, probably 30, 40 feet off the actual roadway of Sutter Lane, where it blocks off the entrance to the rest of the property, is kind of what it does.
Right.
And it's kind of like the neighborhood parking area, there's people parking over it, fighting over it, I talked to a couple of neighbors.
And originally it was to go through to,
Just, no,
Pleasant Valley.
Pleasant Valley, however, there was a house built,
There clearly is.
so it's going no place.
Yeah, for sure.
okay, we've had discussion, public comment. I want to make a motion.
Go ahead.
I'll make a motion, we approve resolution 2019-39, surplusing of the 3 declared lots.
Second it?
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Item number 4, introduction and discussion of amendments to ordinance number 505, purchasing and bidding policy. Thank you, Mr. Wanger. It's John? Oh, it's Dave, okay.
So what's before you is a comprehensive purchasing policy which has been substantially amended from its previous version.
Could you
There are
speak into the
few-
microphone, please?
There are a few areas you may want to discuss, because what we did was throw in items that we brought from other jurisdictions, which may not apply here, but it's a policy decision that you have to make. Most of all, the expenditure limits by department heads and the city manager. If you want to look at those are within norms of larger organizations. You may want to change them here, though. So, for instance, we've given the city manager $15,000 to $50,000 of authority on his signature to spend the city's money. If that's not what you want him to have, then you need to change it tonight.
And staff recommendation is those numbers are way too high. What staff would be looking at in terms of that, from my perspective, would be item C, expenditures $5,001 to $10,000 would be for the department head. 10,000 to 15,000 would be city manager, and then anything over 15,000 would be council.
You're adding the section? Adding a section?
Changing the numbers, or the dollar amounts that are currently listed in the draft, not is it ordinance, policy, draft policy that's on page 10 of 24.
Right.
Okay.
C says 5,001 to 15, but you change that to 10?
C is 5,000 to 10,000.
You're suggesting it be 5.
That's staff's recommendation. Item D, 10,000 to 15,000, 1.5, and then expenditures over $15,001 require council.
What are they currently, Dave? Or does anyone know?
5, I believe,
Just
is the city
5.
manager.
Just 5, correct.
Yeah, I don't know if we need to put in there too, I mean, my concern is that that it gets swept up in, in paperwork, but it would be nice if I would like just a simple email or some communication with the council, either from the management or from our finance director that say, hey, we spent this kind of money on this thing, just so that we're aware of it. If that makes sense. And I mean, we're gonna spend, I don't care, like a couple $100, but certainly if you're pushing up the upward limits, it'd be nice to be aware of it just for the budgets.
Yes, I don't think you'd want that to be part of your purchasing policy, but you can make it a part of your council policy that your department heads and city manager report expenditures at the next meeting.
Right, yeah, that's what I would prefer, just so, I don't like it when people ask me questions and I don't have.
And it's too easy for them to get lost in that big list of checks that have been written.
I'm sorry, John, can you do, C is 5 to 10, and who has that authorization?
That's the department directors,
Okay, so
Okay.
no change there, and the city manager is 10 to 15,
correct.
okay. And we're gonna leave the 51 to 5,000 to the department directors?
The 51,
$51 to 5,000 on the other page?
yes.
And why are we changing this? Just because the price
So-
of things have gone up, or?
What we found in other jurisdictions is that unless you give some spending authority to your department heads and city manager, it just bogs down the system because everything has to come to the council, even minor expenditures for things that the city needs that would be within the management. Now, that all being said, this is a policy decision that the council makes. You could say, I don't want anything. Everything has to come to us. When we've seen that happen, the boards and councils that we work with soon regret that decision because everything comes to them, every contract, and pretty soon you're just bogged down trying to do a $5 contract for somebody. I've seen, well, let me tell you, Trinity County has a very low expenditure for their department heads, almost nothing. Every contract comes to the board. They've had contracts come to the board for $500 for a speaker on a one-time event where the department head, it's not like it's not gonna be approved, it's a board item and pretty soon you're just bogged down in contracts.
Well, things aren't getting purchased.
And things aren't
Except
getting
twice
purchased and
once or
the
twice a
city
month.
business isn't being done. But I understand the concern. You want to keep control of the city dollars and make sure they're not being misused. That's why I think the policy adoption of that whenever money is expended, there has to be a report to the city council at the next council meeting it's easy for the department heads and the city manager to do and keeps you in the loop. And then if you want to change this at any time, you can. So.
I got a couple of questions. What's the difference between a department director and a department manager here? I mean, there really isn't, is there?
No, but again, what part of some of this policy is to look at in the future. So if we have an assistant, shall we say, come in to assist, there's some spending discretion for that person.
I mean, I looked at this and I thought the amounts were too high, so I'm okay with B. I thought C should be, 5,000 to 10,000. That's department director. I thought D should be 10 to 20, or even 10 to 25, and then
either 20 or 25 over, goes to the council. I think Sutter Creek's 20. I know you asked for 15, but I mean, you can't buy anything for $15,000 anymore. So as long as it's in line with the other cities, I'm good. As long as we're going to know about it as well, I'm fine. So I think what it was really crazily low. I mean, $5,000 is. So I'm okay with it being 20 for D. So 0 to 5, 5 to 10, 10 to 20, and then 20 no.
And for, Mr. Mayor, if I can, the checks and balances on this are, none of these expenditures can occur outside the budget, the approved budget that you approve.
Right.
It's only budget expenditures, so they can't go out and say, well, I'd really like a Rembrandt on the wall, so I'm gonna go spend 20,000. If you could buy a Rembrandt for 20, but, it has to be an item that the council has already seen and approved, and now the directors are out purchasing these items.
Well, that was my thought, that it still needs to be within the budget, but I like Dan's idea of at least finding out about it, at the next council meeting, so that if there is a problem developing, we are aware of it soon. And like I say, I don't like, it's too easy for those things to get buried in that big long list of checks that have been written.
I think the most recent example would be when the AC unit went out. We had to retroactively approve it, I believe, and it was already, it was something we had to do. It wasn't going to change it getting done or not. It wasn't going to change the price. It was just going to change the timeliness of it. I mean, that was one more recent example of how this could work. I have a question on, what's it on page? It's on 2.44.080, local preference program. I'm not sure, but I thought the previous program was a 10% deference for local business. On item B, it's the last sentence there. It says it makes it to purchase awarding contracts with an amount not to exceed 5% of the local business total bid price. And it's also, again, is another iteration that on the small business preference. So I'll give a preference to small business, the amount of not to exceed 5% of the small business total price. And I think what that's referring to, I hope, correct me if I'm wrong, but like if we have a local business that bids on something, and they can be considered if they're up to 10% over. In this case, it's up to 5%. I'm not sure if that's something that's dictated by the state, something that we set, or how much latitude we have there.
It's a real balancing act. I can tell you that wherever local preferences are built into purchasing policies, the problem becomes that if you give local businesses too much of a preference, you won't get any bids.
Right.
Nobody outside the city will bid because they know they're not going to get it. They're not going to waste their time. It costs money to prepare a bid response, so they just don't do it. But if they see that it's reasonable and 5% has been determined to be somewhat a reasonable bid allowance, then they're willing to compete, and they take that into account when they're bidding because they know this. They know they're going to be dealing with this, so they adjust their bids accordingly. But if you go to 10, anything over 10, you're starting to get where they're just not going to bid. So.
John, I think our current policy is 10%. Have we had any problems with people bidding or not bidding because of the 10%, do you know, or are you aware of that at all?
I'm not aware that we've had where people are not bidding because of that.
I think 10% to me, in my mind, is acceptable. I don't think any more than that, just because we don't want to get skin in the way out. But the deliverables might be a little bit more local. I don't know. That's my thought there anyway. Give local guy a chance. Most of these things, I mean, it's a very narrow amount of things that we actually can purchase locally just because of our geographical location. And what's in Ione, the zip code particularly.
The last contract that I remember that was awarded locally, the bidder was low outright.
Okay.
And that was Eco-Urban for the testing. Like I said, they were the low bidder outright.
And also, that's another question to kind of tag on to that, not to go too far on this, but is there a way to give a county preference? I mean, I don't know, Ione the zip code is pretty small, there's not a ton of business here, but I mean, is it to any advantage of the city to give a local preference to Amador County resident businesses? Is that something that's done normally or not? I mean, some counties, they've got all the resources they need right there. We're, just because of it's nice to keep business local, and local around here ends up being counties by the nature of how it exists.
Well, can't you just expand the zip code to the county and just,
Well, I would like to
Look
keep
at that.
the local preference local, but we could do a county preference of 5% maybe, stagger it 5 and 10% if that's not going too far in the weeds, I don't know.
I'm good with that.
Is that,
It's something certainly we can look at and bring, this ordinance is gonna have to come back anyway,
Okay.
so. Let us look at that. Here's what I'm afraid of. I don't want to get you where you're violating the
right,
contract
I get, that's exactly,
and bidding requirements that the state legislature has set out.
that's what I'm asking, that's why I'm asking the question.
There are rules so that everybody's treated fairly, but almost everybody has a local preference nowadays, and
Okay.
you just have to craft it in a way where you're not violating the contract code. So let me look see if we can do a step for a higher percentage for Ione businesses, and maybe a step down for businesses within Alabama County, but not in the city of Ione, and see if we can make that work.
Doesn't matter, thank you, thank you.
I have a question on page 6 of 24. There's a discussion of a questionnaire that has to be completed, that the city has to have. And I don't believe we have one of these. Is this something that we're going to put together? And if so, who's going to do it?
What page was that?
6 of 24 on 24.44.120. B. The forms for the questionnaire, financial statement, and statements of experience will be provided as part of the pre-qualification bidding packet. So we as a city have to provide this questionnaire, which means we as a city have to develop it, is my understanding. Do we have one of these?
I can tell you we used, well, first of all, it depends on the project. For instance, a wastewater project versus a street project, you're gonna have two different questionnaires. But I can tell you, we actually used that process to pre-qualify bidders for the original project out at the wastewater treatment plant. So yes, we do, we have developed those in the past depending upon the project. And I will tell you, it's somewhat rare because a $2 million project is a pretty large project, but I will tell you that we've done that.
Okay. And then on page 7 of 24, there's on K, the city manager shall hear the appeal, but then there's some places where you have a designee and places where you don't have a designee, and should we always have a designee or should we always not have a designee? K, well, K, if you go to L,
Okay, and then you go down one.
Oh, okay.
L has a city manager or designee, but K does not. And the decision of the city manager is final. Should that also have the designee in it?
Yes, it should be uniform throughout the document. If the city manager is appointed to hear appeals and finalize those appeals, but is allowed to delegate that authority, then it needs to be throughout the document.
Okay, so
Whoever
that
has
needs-
delegated the authority would have to carry it all the way through.
Okay, so that needs to be,
We'll fix that.
yeah, that needs to be fixed throughout then.
And one thing I was looking at it too was talking about where we advertise that. I assume most of these things are advertised online. I mean, these days there's a lot more resources available, not just in the local paper. If you go to the local paper, you reach a small portion of people, and there's it's where you stop, but also you shouldn't just not, because I'm not sure if that's something we have to determine, or it's just up to the staff to where we list things like jobs, for
Yeah.
instance. I mean,
So the problem is the law's has not caught up with our technical age yet.
yeah, exactly.
Most of the state laws refer to a paper of local jurisdiction or
Mhm.
circulation, and more they don't exist. So,
Right.
wherever that, let us look at that and make sure this document is up to date.
Because I know right now there's no paper in Ione. There's a paper that comes to Ione, and we have a county paper, but it's also, it would be nice to, I don't know, have that Do we list it on our website currently? There's usually a section.
When there's bids going out, they're listed on the website. John, in terms of contracting, there's a.
Some of them have specific
For
websites.
for capital projects, street, sewer, whatever, we do list it in the paper. We publish it twice in accordance with the public contract code, but for every capital project, we also send it to at least 3 bid rooms. It's usually Sacramento,
Yeah.
Stockton, and another one, but those get sent electronic versions of everything immediately, because those are one of the hubs where contractors go to get notified of things. Because they're honestly, at this point in the game, I'm not going to say they're not going to see it in the local paper where they're going to see it though as the bid room. So we every capital project goes to those.
I think a lot of I'm thinking more of, because I know those specific roads, sewer type stuff, there's places that are just for them. But some of our other contracts, I mean, we advertise jobs, I assume we advertise them on the website, but also, this isn't referring to that specifically, but.
Right, I mean, there's a number of those websites that have come up that we utilize.
Okay, well, they'll look at it, I guess, and they'll figure out there's other places we can advertise, and it's like technology catching up to us here.
Diane, you had another one?
I do. Number 6 on page 11 of 24. There's no definition of the lowest responsible bidder. What is that?
Well, it is defined by the lowest responsible bidder is defined by state law. And
Okay.
basically it is, we make that determination internally, that 1, it's the lowest bid, and 2, it's a bidder that is responsible and can carry through the job. Sometimes you get a low bid and it's not somebody who can actually do the work, they're just bidding. So we have to look at that. So that's not normally the case, but it does happen. So all of those decisions are staff decisions that are made. And the lowest responsible bid is a term of art in the bidding practices. So.
And I can tell you in almost all of our bid documents, we specify things like what type of contract, whether it's a Class A, Class B, what have you. We have documents laid out of what they have to present. So when we go through and look at a responsive bidder, part of it is their low bid, but then they have provided everything that we've asked for in the bid documents, and then we do, depending upon the projects and what we ask for, sometimes we do reference checks. So there's a whole process that's laid out in the bid documents typically.
Do we have to take the lowest bid? Because the lowest bid isn't always the best bid.
That's what they're talking about, yeah.
I mean,
Lowest responsible bid.
Well, responsible bidder, I'm still not clear what I don't know what the
The answer to
definition
that
of responsible
question
is.
is, most times, yes, you have to take the lowest bid, if they're a responsible bidder. The bidding process is the standard bidding process in California is the lowest, government has to take the lowest bid. You're right, it's not always the best product. There are ways around that, but we have to do it on a case-by-case basis. There would have to be findings that you would make, and it would be brought to you, and you would make those findings and then direct staff to do something different than awarding to the lowest bidder. But that's a process, and that's, again, staff gets involved in that process when they get a response to bids, and they're looking at them and they're saying, well, here's the lowest bidder, but we don't think they're going to do a good job, so we need to go to the council. So.
Well, we probably just need to anticipate if there's certain materials that we want, we have to include that in the bid.
Yes, yeah, exactly. But the people who do, specifically, engineering, John deals with this most of all. My office would only get involved when something goes bad in the bidding process and somebody makes a challenge.
Yeah, or if questions come up, for instance, if they didn't sign a piece of paper or they didn't put a check mark, we always want to check to make sure that it's not what's considered a fatal flaw in the bid, or if it is, then we have to reject that bid and we come to you under the suggestion of award and say we received X amount of bids, the lowest bid received was considered non-responsive because X, Y, and Z. So we're recommending you go with the second low bid, so that typically is a whole process that we go through.
One more. Are the MeBe and Weebies, are they part of the federal process only, or are we as a city requiring the MeBes and Weebies?
Typically, those only come into impact for state or federally funded projects.
Okay.
I only got two things to say. Dan's exactly right on the local contractors. There's quite a few local contractors that are amazing at what they do, but they have no clue that a job is going on or whatever. So I don't know how we would fix that, but so that's a huge issue to me.
Well, and if, I think the way it's been fixed in other places where we work is that if they, you notify local contractors and local businesses that if they want to receive notice of a job, then they sign up for the city. I think Janice already has that process, so it's something that they need to know to do, but once they do it,
Okay. So if I tell them
they get a
to call
notice.
Janice or
Yeah, they
on
get a
the
notice and
website.
they request a bid. So-
The other thing I will say is that the city of Ione has adopted what's called the Uniform Cost Accounting Code, which allows us to use something called an informal bidding procedure. And what's supposed to happen is, I can't remember what the limit is now, it's either 175 or 250, somewhere around there. If a project is of 200, let's say it's 250,000 or less, whatever, there's a limit in the public contract code that the index, that will produce an advertisement once a year, and we can let contractors know, and just saying, if you want to be considered for these informal projects, let us know and we'll put you on a list, and then any time a project comes out, we'll send out a letter that says, hey, we have this project if you're interested, and kind of get the bid out. So
Yeah,
that's-
under this policy, anything under $50,000 would be an informal process. So-
Okay.
It seems like it'd be easy to identify contractors within the city simply by going to the building permit, or not, excuse me, the business license, right?
Can we as a city go give that to them directly? Don't they have to come to us first?
No, I'm just saying we could use that to send out a notice that there is a list, and if you want to be on it.
Well, I'll let them all know.
I see what you're saying.
The best way is to just let them know that it exists. Staff would get overwhelmed if they had to, every time there was a bid, notify every business in town.
Right.
Right.
So,
But when somebody comes and gets a business license, you can just let them know, yeah, if you want to be on the list, here it is.
And the other thing I wanted to, more of a statement, I guess, on the expenditures, and it's no secret I don't like wasting money. And I feel that there's some people on staff or in the establishment, let's call it, that I'd be totally fine with giving them 20 or 50,000 to go do what they want, because I trust them. Some of them, I wouldn't give them $100. So that's just my personal feeling on it.
well, and in listening to the comments of the council, I can say that I will add the reporting element to this ordinance so that no department head nor the city manager will be able to spend money without a report to the council. It'll come at the back end, but it'll allow you to start seeing what's happening. They know they're gonna have to report to the council by ordinance, by law here. So I think it's gonna hold their feet to the fire. And if you see something happening, you'll be able to stop it.
Okay.
They could get one bias, but they won't get a second.
Okay.
I got one last thing on page, is a 23 to 24, and it's a contract with small minority businesses, women business enterprises, and labor surplus area firms. It says we have to do some things here. Is that something that, I mean, where did these lists come from, and how do we know? Is it something that we're gonna have to do in addition to what we're already doing?
That's the MeBe Weebies I was referring to.
I know, well, it's I mean, it
We
may
got-
have to be in there, but I'm just not sure how that's gonna do anything. I mean, I don't know, is that a list that we get? Is it?
It's actually, in order to be a qualified WBE, MBE, DBE, there's a whole process that the state makes you go through in order to get qualified, and the state keeps a list, and that list is actually at a specific website. And for instance, if we have a project that has state or federal funding in it, and the state or federal program says your goal is 6% participation by whatever, we have to include that in the bid documents. We have to list the website where they have to go,
What's the qualification for the contract then?
Yeah, so,
They
so
have to go
they,
together.
they have
Oh,
to
okay.
do, they have to make the efforts to
Okay.
do that, and sometimes they're successful, but if they're not successful, if a low bid comes in and they said, hey, you guys told us it was 6% DVE participation, and we were only able to get 3, or we didn't get any, usually there's a process that's mandated that says you have to show us your good faith efforts, which means it ends up, sometimes you get a binder this thick that shows they advertised, who they got responses from, why they didn't, you know, I mean, there's a whole process that they have to go
That's what I'm asking, is it gonna cost us a bunch of money to,
It's not so much
part of the
us.
process, I guess, so.
It's not so much us, it's the contractor that has to jump through.
It's more of a process question.
Correct.
All right, thank you.
I'm done. Sorry.
Okay, this is not an action item, but if there's a member of the public that would like to speak to this, we'll let you do so now.
Yeah, one of my things is I'd like to know how this affects the perks contract, because it says in there they can do what they want in their contract. I wonder if that's gonna be reworded.
Well, that question was asked of me, and the bottom line is that contractors are not affected by the purchasing ordinance. Well, for instance, I'm a contractor, I'm a contractor with the city. The way I spend money in my firm is not controlled by this purchasing ordinance, nor is any of your other contractors. So you can only control what is within your authority to control, and contractors, if they're truly independent and are going to remain that, then they can't be controlled by this ordinance.
Does that answer your question?
Well, kinda, I don't quite, they can still do what they want down there. Is that what you're saying?
As far as purchasing goes, yes.
Yeah, and they can purchase anything they want, and you don't have no say about it. I don't think that's right. It's written in a contract that way if you read it.
Right, but they're paying for it.
Yeah, they don't
Yes,
pass it on to
and
us.
that's a contracting issue. If you're concerned about what they're doing with city money when it goes to them, then when you contract with them, you make clear in the contract, this is what you're limited to.
Right,
But you can't do it by ordinance. It has to be a contract.
okay.
Right, so
So we just-
the answer
so-
would be that at the time of contract renegotiation, that would have to be addressed.
Yeah, well, I guess the rule will be, but anyway, the second thing is, I think this A, B, and C stuff, if you hold it to $15,000, you guys get the vote, and if you know about it, why do you need to have them write it down to the superintendent and all that? The city manager controls all that, why would you need all them steps? I don't see where that needs to be, where the superintendent or the department head can bid on 5 to 10,000, I think you guys said,
Right,
when he's in charge of the whole thing anyway. I mean, he knows when they're gonna purchase this kind of stuff.
Well, because if the chief of police, for example, wants to go out and buy something, he's the department head, he doesn't necessarily have to run it by John. I mean, he has his own, he's got his budget, he works with his budget.
$10,000 is a lot of money in my book. I don't give a dang what
Well,
anybody
that's,
says.
if he's given, whatever, $50,000 to spend on, this isn't, you don't get to spend 10,000 on what you want. It's, if he has to go out and buy some uniforms, that we've approved that he can buy uniforms up to a certain amount of money, he doesn't need to run it by John. This doesn't mean that you get to go out and spend, every department head gets to go out and spend their $5 or $10 or $15,000. That's not what it's about.
Okay,
They're
now-
set in the budget.
Okay, now, if you do what you guys want, will the public ever get to see this, where this money's going?
Yes,
This
because
is what I wanna
we're
know.
now gonna require them, that they have a bit more reporting to do.
you have to come back.
And you always get to see it in the warrants and claims. You always get it.
Well, now
And you
gotta
get it,
go
and you
through-
get it in the budget. So you get it.
But you gotta go to the finance person to get what they spent each month to see where it went to.
Well, it's supposed to come out every
That's
month
what
or
I'm
every
saying.
couple of months in the warrants and claims. So
But
you
now,
get that.
but now it'll be coming to us at the very next open city council
Bring it
meeting.
to attention.
Well, okay, now will it be brought up at the council meetings
Right.
what they spent?
Yes, that's what we're directing,
Thank you.
I believe that's what we're directing. I don't want to speak out of turn.
Yeah, it's an extra, like form of, in over and above what we're already getting now.
I mean, it could just be as simple as just another item on the agenda, even in the consent calendar, would say we spent $8,000 on an AC unit, and there it is, and we're done.
I hate to say it, as you know, a lot of money was spent here in this city for nothing. Tons of it. Thank you.
Just for my note keeping, so did you, have you decided if it's gonna be John's 15,000 to, 10 to 15, or did we change it to go to, I'm making notes, or is it changed to 20?
I don't know that we have a consensus on that yet.
Okay,
I don't know if Dave needs, he said he's gonna redo the,
so it'll come back.
redo it and come back, but he had a few suggestions, so I don't know if Dave needs a consensus on it. He's got a suggestion from staff, he's got a suggestion from the council.
I wanted to ask, my name is Rhonda Pope, I'm here as just a curious body. One, was the city manager the one denying the application? You had raised a question, and I wanted to get clarification. So on the bidding process, is the city manager the one that denies?
I'm not sure.
It depends on.
So on
Who's
the
doing
appeal process, so who
Oh, the appeal
denies and
process.
who appeals?
Okay,
I guess I
that's over
wanted
here.
clarification on that.
No, well, let's say that
See that?
city engineering puts out a bid for construction.
No, I understand that, just who denies and then,
Well, the bid would be awarded by city engineering to the council.
okay, no, if the bid is denied and then it goes through an appeal process, is the city manager the one denying the bid
Well,
and?
I guess we're
and doing the
confused. We don't
appeal?
deny bids. We simply pick a bidder
Okay,
who's successful. All the other bidders can appeal then. All of them can. So let's say there's 10, you pick one, 9 of them can appeal. That doesn't
Okay.
happen, but
Okay.
it could happen.
okay, I was
And
confused
then that
about
would go to the city manager.
Okay, so I was just wanting to make sure that the city manager wasn't handling both ends of the process.
No.
So,
And what I was referring to was the pre-qualification of bidder for public works projects. So that's a pre-qualification process where they would have, it outlines what their options are.
Yeah.
Should they be denied that, they would have the ability to appeal that.
okay, gotcha. And then my only other, I think I understand what Larry's concern is about the tier. I did hear, so the tiered process of approval, you identified 3 different positions, but one doesn't really exist? Is that true, or it does?
No, there was, the word is director or department manager, and we don't have department managers at this time.
So then,
I mean, we have department managers or department heads, it's just the wording.
so I'm just a stickler on definitions. And if you have definitions for, like in your fiscal policy, whatever policy, and you define these positions in those policies, and then you make an ordinance that, so I would just say be very clear to make sure that in that policy, you're pulling the language from that policy to put into your ordinance, because otherwise you're gonna have conflicts. And if you have a position that is not identified in that ordinance, or vice versa, if you have a position identified in your ordinance that doesn't exist in your policy, you're gonna run into a bunch of problems. So I would keep your language consistent with your policy and whatever you're putting in your ordinance. And I'll just throw my 2 cents in. I think if you started out with a $5,000 limit, I would just make sure that whatever you decide on your levels, going from 5 to 20 is kind of significant. So once again, I would just identify whatever you have in your fiscal, whatever the word is, policy that you have, that it matches what you're ending up going to do. Otherwise, you're going to have slippery slopes with department heads making decisions. And then my final comment would be, and I think it goes back to his concern, is if you have the budget set up and then you have, whether it's a department head, manager, whoever, looking and approving that, yes, this is in the budget. I think that's what his concern is it one, in the budget, and two, did somebody actually approve it before it comes to you and says, oops, we spent this money and we didn't really check to make sure it was in the budget. I'm saying that from experience because I've actually had my people in my departments overspend, and you can't undo that, and you just end up eating that money. So I would just highly recommend that you have clear delineations of who's approving and who's checking to make sure that there's funds in that budget when you're doing that. And that's all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so I see if we can get consensus here. I think what we're asking is to come back, as far as the expenditure limits are concerned, to maybe come back to us with two, the one that's on here and the recommendation from staff, where C is 5 to 10 and D is 10 to 15 and E is 15 and above. Is that, I mean, if we get those two to choose from, would that be sufficient, or do you have another?
Yeah, first of all, we don't have a jump from 5 to 20. It's 5,000 was one, and then we proposed 10,000 being the other one, and then John said 15 for the city manager, and I thought that was low, but you know, I would be okay with 20, and then anything over 20 goes to the council. So I could care less if it's 15 or if it's 20. I just think 15 is a little low.
Yeah.
I'm fine with that.
Yeah, those two.
I'm fine with that.
Are you fine with 15 or are you fine with 20?
I want 15.
Okay. I'm good with 15.
I'm 15, of course.
Okay, so I think if we come back with a 15, sounds like we're, the 5 to 10, 10 to 15, and 15 and above.
Can I add one more thing? On the department director who may delegate to a department manager, the 51 to 5,000, if it is in fact a department manager and not the department director, I would almost like to see a approval or authorization or sign off by the department director for anything 2,500 and above. Now, I don't know that you want to put that in here necessarily as more of a policy and procedure, standard of performance,
The way I
but
look at, the way I look at spending limits and purchasing policies are that if a department director, or let's say department head,
right,
no matter what
which
they're
is
called.
fine, I don't have any problem with the department
So the
head.
department head delegates to somebody subordinate to that position the authority to go out and spend some money within this range. That's the department head action.
Right. It's still the department. Head.
So I think we should just keep it with department heads. They can always say to somebody, go spend this money.
Sure.
But if they do, and it's wrong, it's the department head who's responsible for that.
Sure, if the chief tells the sergeant to go buy something, it's still on the chief.
Yes.
Then if it goes over the budget, they have to come back to council for budget amendment.
Yeah.
If
So what
they-
I'm hearing is we're giving them a little more flexibility with money, but they're gonna be held more accountable. Is that
So-
They are gonna be held accountable.
So how's it more accountable?
Yes, well, right now, I don't think they have any reporting requirement for their current level.
Okay.
Under this scenario, they're gonna get some more authority to act and move the city forward, but they're gonna have to report to the city council immediately afterwards what they've done, so.
And by
So they can
report
keep
again.
tabs on
And by report, I mean just simply in the consent calendar is fine by me, just a note saying I had to spend
it. It may
8,000 on
it may just be
whatever.
a list of expenditures that
Yeah,
are done
that's
under
fine.
this policy.
And I'm
Yeah.
100%, that's exactly what I want, that's all. It's simple, I don't need to have a guy come in and tell us what's going on, the gal come in and tell us
But
what's
then,
going on. See it.
if you had a question about it, you could request the department head to be present and ask a question.
So that report is going to include payments, including the 51 to 5,000, so we're gonna have a list of, an untenable list of payments. I mean, how many $51
Depends how much you
payments do
want.
we make?
Well, we don't need to necessarily include
That's,
that.
I mean,
Right.
so then we need to tell, if that's the case, then we need to decide what that level's going to be.
Let's make it 1,000.
Yeah, that would seem reasonable to me,
Is that consensus?
because then it's,
That's a good point.
because then
Every
that,
time you buy a pen, you're gonna have to report it.
Right, I don't want every
and then
$52.
well, then it's a pointless
Sure, because
document.
no one's ever gonna read it.
Right.
So we're saying we want reporting over.
No, that covers
So anything over 1,000 has to be
Yeah.
reported from this.
And probably should check with Lori too on that, just to make sure that this isn't gonna create a whole nother list of things. Because I mean, $1,000, we spend a lot of different things I'm thinking about, just the bills that go out. I mean, that's, yeah, things that are in the budget.
I want to make the assumption that once we get the software system
Push the button.
fully dialed in, it'll be a
That's
whole
what I
lot
think.
easier.
I'm thinking of things like, you pay a PG&E bill, is it over $1,000?
Yeah, right,
Do
that's
we
what-
need to know
yeah.
about it?
Again, part of what you look at in terms of, it's non-PO, three informal bids. I mean,
Right, purchasing that.
purchasing, not your regular
Right.
expenditure.
Exactly.
Operations aren't in there.
Yeah, we want to,
Yeah.
restrict that.
So what I've got right now is department heads 5 to 10, city manager 10 to 15, anything over 15 to the council. Anything over 1,000 expended by department heads or city manager must be reported to the city council at the next council meeting following the expenditure. We're going to refine the city preference to provide a city preference, county preference, and others. And we're going to fix the city manager
Designee.
as an appellate judge for his designee, so that it's the same throughout. And then we'll deal with the bid advertisement and taking the speaker's comments, look at the definitions, so we make sure that we're all talking about the same thing.
Sounds good.
All right, thank you. Moving on, introduce, item number 5, introduce and waive the first reading by substitution of title only ordinances number 506 through 517. And I'm going to stop there.
Mr. Mayor and council members, this happens every 3 years. The state goes through and makes amendments to the building codes, and they adopt them on a 3-year cycle. Last one that was adopted by the state was 2016. And if agencies do nothing, otherwise they take no exceptions to the code, then the state code has to go into effect January 1st of, in this case, 2020. And what has historically happened in the past is there's been some minor administrative changes or sometimes other things that have been requested to be included outside of the state codes. And this process tonight is the introduction of 12 different ordinances that cover all the codes within the municipal code relating to building. And for the most part, previous city amendments from earlier code visions have been carried forward in the ordinances that are attached to this. But then in the staff report, I also highlighted, based on each different code, what the either minor or exceptions were. And I'm certainly not going to go through any of those or all of those, but I will say that there are 3 things that kind of stand out this year. First one is with respect to California Swimming Pool Safety Act, which affects the California Building Code. There was a section that was added for required barrier fence around pool in the past, and the current code did away with that, which was interesting because it seems like that would be something safety related and mandated. So in order to get a clarification on that, staff contacted the state, and the state responded that it was up to the individual jurisdictions to require a barrier fence. So what we have kept in our particular ordinance with respect to swimming pools is there should be the barrier fence that has been historically required to make sure for safety.
And does that delineate between like a temporary pool, a kiddie pool, or in-ground pool? I mean, is there some definition of what a pool means? I mean, if you read it strictly, you'd have to have, if you had a kid pool, you'd have to put a fence around it.
I believe it's in-ground pools, but I will say that I am the messenger on this.
Yeah.
Some of our building department folks.
Because sometimes we
know
have a
lot more
temporary
than I
pool
do.
in the backyard, and there's a fence all around the yard, but it's not just around the pool. I mean, I
Right.
don't know how that.
Typically, you have to have from any exit from a house, you have to either have an alarm on the door,
Yeah.
that says kids are going out, if there's not a separating fence between
Okay.
whatever the back door to the house is and the pool.
So,
Yes, you do. I have.
Yeah.
so the new, you're saying the new California state code does not require the barrier fences?
That's correct.
Wow.
But our city ordinance does require?
What we're saying is that in the ordinances that are beginning, the initial introduction of those is tonight, that we are keeping the requirement for a barrier in our particular code for City of Ione.
So I'm with Dan. I would like to make sure that swimming pool is defined because, the above-ground pool that is now is almost as big as an in-ground pool.
It's a barrier itself. I mean, you have to have a ladder to get into it. I mean, it's,
But,
You don't require, it's not required to have a permit to put up a pop-up pool.
okay, all right,
You
So
can
we
put up
would-
a pop-up pool anytime you want in any yard you want.
okay. I may already be there then, yeah.
So.
but it seems to me like one of those is
Not a
as
permanent
dangerous
fixture.
to children as an in-ground pool.
I will definitely have our building guys look into it.
But on the other hand, the 3-foot diameter kiddie pool in the front yard, I mean.
So I'll have them look into whether that definition exists within the current building code, and if not, we can certainly add that in.
Okay.
So that was the first one. The second one was regarding expiration of building permits. In the 2016 code, it allowed permits to remain valid for 180 days after their issuance. And there was an Assembly Bill 2913 that was passed that became into effect on September 21st, 2018, that actually amended that time frame and extended it from 180 days to 365 days, which we have not made any exceptions to that in the code, and what we're recommending, but I'm just letting the council know that in essence what they've done is allowed permits to stay active double what they have in the past.
And what problems does that create? I mean, I can see it, I mean, you can just decide they slow down or whatever. But I mean, also they can come and get an amendment, I think they can get it to, the extension on it, I think, right?
Possibly, yes. But I will tell you that I don't think it creates any problems necessarily for the city. It's just being called for an inspection and making sure that things get done. And then the last thing, and actually this wasn't written in there because it's part of the California Energy Code, but just wanted to let the council know that with this code update, the new code, California Energy Code, actually requires solar to be installed with every new house, which means that's going to add a cost, at least what the state has told us is that adds a cost of roughly $8,000 per house. However, they did say that over a 30-year period, once those solar panels are installed, they're estimated to save $19,000 over 30 years. So we didn't make any exceptions or make any suggestions to that. It's pretty much statewide that they're going for new houses that it's mandatory to have solar installed.
Does it say what kind of solar? I mean, how many, how many panels you have to have?
No,
Is
it
it's
didn't get that
So
specific.
you
I think
can
that-
throw up one panel and be in compliance?
No, I think the intent was that it covered the energy costs for the house. It provided enough supplemental solar power to offset what the house would typically use.
When do these come into effect?
January 1st.
So all the new homes, Castle Oaks are gonna, is that from permit pull or from, so if I pull a permit now, do they still, if they don't, do they have to start construction or what's the deal on that?
If they have a building permit that has been approved prior to January 1st,
Then they're good.
then they're good for up to 365 days.
Right.
So they have that year period, I believe, to continue on with the model homes that they have had approved. However, let's say Wildflower or Castle Oaks comes in and they submit permits January 2nd, just as an example. They would have to comply with these new codes, both the energy codes and everything else that are in there.
Is that something we have to pass through that we have discretion on, or? No, we have to pass it then?
You have to make it more stringent or
Correct.
pass it.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah, I heard about this from a couple of contractors a few months ago.
It is amazing, 'cause I mean, I've been in these meetings and I'm like, I can't figure out why cost of housing is going up. I'm like, well, the weight's getting more and more on the consumer. I mean, that's the thing.
It's mandated.
Right. Well, I mean, the builder doesn't care, it's passed through, they sell it, that's their objective, and the solar panel guy doesn't care, he's making money.
Does seem to go against the whole idea of more affordable housing.
But we do want affordable housing.
Yeah, kind of. Over 30 years. Not for the first 12, but whatever.
So is that on, sorry to interrupt.
There-
Is that on all housing?
It's on new housing.
I mean,
It's
what
not,
about apartments, things like that? What about commercial buildings?
I believe it's on new residential housing. So I believe, at least from what I've heard, and I can confirm this again, but I believe like apartment buildings, whether it's multi or single family residential.
It would include those as well.
What, ADUs?
That's an interesting question. It's a very
Probably
interesting
not
question.
ADUs except for.
I think ADUs are most likely exempt, but that's a great question.
They're really pushing them, you wouldn't think they'd want to hold them back.
Containers are building for the homeless, so they're gonna have to solar
Well,
panels.
the good thing is now is ADUs could be any size that you want. So you could build like a really tiny house and then build a giant ADU. I mean, it's like reverse. I mean, the new rules don't make any sense. You could build a 500 square foot home and then you could build a 5,000 square foot ADU, as long as it fits on your lot. Where it used to be, the ADU was 50% of the size of the house. So,
It's changed this year.
yeah, it just changed a few months ago.
Just this year. Yep. You can
It
build
changes
two of
every
them.
6 months, pretty much. That's about the second or third change.
Was that the only major changes, John?
In the staff report, it goes literally ordinance by ordinance. Most of them honestly are administrative changes, whether it's grammatical corrections or dates or what have you. But there are, as I mentioned, the Swimming Pool Act comes into play with the building code. For instance, on the California Residential Building Code, there's a requirement to provide a 36-inch wide pathway on the roof between the edge of the roof and the photovoltaic cells, and that's typically a fire requirement, so if they need to get up on the roof and fight the fire, that there's room.
If you talk to any solar installer and that's come through Ione, they'll tell you that we have the most stringent solar requirements. I've never seen this anyplace else. I heard it from 2 or 3 of them. Now it's standard, I guess, so it's just kind of interesting.
What about our seismic zones? I see in there they had geology and the seismic deal, and are they basically putting us in the same category as Santa Barbara? Or did they actually go back and put us in the right?
I believe that we're in the right zone.
Okay. So we don't have to rebuild Main Street.
Right.
We had this problem in Sutter Creek with the building. It was set up for a tsunami of 150 miles an hour, but it wouldn't pass code because no one earthquake stamped it.
Right. Right. Anyway, this is the first reading. This comes back to you in December again, but I know this is a lot to take in with 12 different ordinances, but for the most part, we've adopted, except for the things that I've mentioned. There are small administrative changes in there, but again, if we don't adopt any changes, we basically are mandated to adopt the state codes. So we've tried to carry forward everything that's been in our past codes.
I'll say 2 things real quick. The swimming pool fence thing, I can tell you how that came about. If you have money, you don't have to have a fence. You look at any big pool with a waterfall, you don't fence them. They're called a pond or a fountain. When I was at Castle Oaks, we built the pool, and they talked about the fence, and they said, do you want a fence or no? And I said, is there an option? And they said, well, you can put in a waterfall or a fountain in the corner, and they're exempt. So if you ever look at mansions, they don't fence their pools. So that's probably one of the reasons I did this. Other thing I'd like to say is the extent of the permits for 365 days. I think that's a good thing. Not to pick on John, I don't know if this planning or what, but I know people in the audience have spent 600 days for plan reviews. So I think I like the idea of extending their permit for a year. I'm exaggerating on that. I hear that's a big complaint. Plan checks take forever.
Okay, this is a non-action item.
It's just to waive the first reading to that tonight
Okay.
and set the next hearing, which would be the 3rd of the 17th.
December 3rd,
The staff report actually says December 17th. But we can-
17th.
We can set it,
Oh, sorry.
notice it for the third. Okay.
Is it the 3rd or the 17th?
All right,
Third.
it's the
The
third.
notice for the 3rd.
Okay.
Okay, I will open this to public comment. Would anybody like to
I gotta say something.
speak to this?
You people are bringing up ADUs, you guys need to read Prop 68. You need to read the whole dang thing. Because man, I'll tell you what, that you can do anything you want. 4 foot from the sides, 4 foot, you can build 2 ADUs, you got room, 8, 20, 22,000 square foot one, you read it and you can put it in there. You don't need no solar, read it. And you gotta accept the sewer. They're trying to stop the sewer, and the sewer, as you know, a 3-inch sewer can handle 5 bedrooms. 4-inch can handle 8 bedrooms. I just wanted you to know that, because I keep seeing this where they wanna add money onto you out of an apartment or something, they keep wanting to add money maybe for the sewer system. It ain't gonna work, federal's already figured that out. But the Prop 68, you guys ought to read, it is unreal. I mean,
Yeah,
you
it's
wanna
a very
build an
loose,
ADU, and no CCNRs, no nothing can stop it, and if you have trouble, you get a hold of the Attorney General, you don't screw around. Thank you.
I don't know if you read the papers or you listen to TV, this is just the beginning of what, I'm gonna say our governor's doing in his Democrat Party. So I mean, people don't realize when they vote what they got themselves into. The next thing is, we're all gonna have electric cars. So, and he's got Ford Company, they're gonna go all to all electric cars, so I'm just saying, and if you want, they have a deal where you can recall the governor, you can sign that. And like Dominic said, oh, you gotta do this. Well, if you don't vote and you don't vote for the right people and get out there and campaign, you're in trouble, so. It's even in the county, because I went up there to do some work at the county, and brother, they have tripled their fees on house taxes on certain things when you do it. And there's no way to beat them, so I'm just telling you, you guys better all vote Republicans.
Off topic there, Andy, but thanks anyway.
I'm just saying.
Gavel him.
Democrats are making.
Haven't
all-
gavelled anybody yet, maybe you could be my first.
Democrats are the ones that are making all these rules, so what does that tell you?
All right, there's no action required here, so we'll move on to item number 6, discussion related to the Creek Committee ordinance.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, Council.
Thanks, John.
Pardon me. At one of our previous meetings, Mayor Reed asked to have the Creek Committee ordinance kind of reviewed and maybe make some recommended changes to it. The city attorney has sat down, reviewed it, and has made some recommended changes that are highlighted or are marked in red. That language that is underlined is added, that language that is struck through is deleted. This is an opportunity here for the council to kind of weigh in and provide direction to the city attorney in terms of what they want to see for this committee. As it stands now, the mayor could reactivate this committee without any changes to the ordinance. Again, what staff is looking for is direction. One of the things that the attorney and I were talking about related to this ordinance that wasn't marked on this was a section in terms of serving secretary to the committee, chapter 2.62.060. Staff would like to recommend a change that be changed to the city clerk instead of department head. Simply because in terms of looking at the duties in the last paragraph about making and keeping a record of all resolutions, transactions, findings, and determinations of the commission, those are the public records, those are what staff would deem as the duties of the city clerk. And Janice, correct me if I'm wrong, when the committee did meet, you were serving as secretary for that group.
I would strongly agree with that.
So you want that's going to continue?
What we're recommending is that change in the ordinance.
Yeah,
The
okay.
ordinance currently
Yes.
has department head, and what we're recommending is that to be changed.
You want it to be changed to have it to
City
be
clerk.
Janish.
Yeah, the city clerk.
All right.
And does the commission, I guess it's 5 members, so they're residents of Ione, but do they have to have property along the creek, or can they just be anybody in Ione?
Anybody?
Because I know some of the creeks, a lot of the creek is owned by the actual residents up to the middle of the creek, and should that be a requirement that they have a vested interest in the creek committee, or does it even matter?
Last time I was told if you had property on the creek, you weren't allowed to be on the committee.
Well, that's what I'm asking, I'm trying
Well,
to
I thought
clarify.
you could, you just couldn't be, everybody had property on the
Be the
creek.
majority.
Right.
Yeah, and I don't think, you're gonna be appointing people, you're gonna get applications for, and you can take that into consideration. But I agree, I don't think you want just creek residents on the committee,
Okay.
so.
However,
doesn't
that's
mean you
not
can't keep
delineated.
up. So we don't wanna define it,
Right.
because that gives you the ultimate authority to decide who's on this committee.
You definitely want some people that live on it and have to deal with it all the time. These are the ones that are up front and personal and are probably more well aware of the issues than somebody that lives out in the Highlands. And the creeks, that says creeks, so that's basically Sutter Creek. This is all creeks in the city of Ione. There are other creeks, there's some drainage ditches and some
Mill Creek.
things. There is out at Castle Oaks, there's a creek out there too, Mill Creek.
It says creeks.
We left the creeks as broad simply because if you just restrict it to the one, I mean, you do have issues at Mill Creek, so.
Right.
And again, as the community expands, you want to make sure that you're encompassing anything that may come into the future. So like I said, we did leave it
Okay.
creeks as broad.
And the related floodways, is that gonna be defined either? Because I know like the map from there's an inundation map from the Henderson Reservoir, if you haven't seen that, it shows the flood map, and that would be an issue if it, or just whenever Little Creek floods, is that kind of what that's saying? I'm not getting too far in the weeds, but I mean, but there's an inundation map. If the Henderson Reservoir should burst, there is a timeline that shows what's gonna get wiped out and when. I'm not sure if that's talking about floodways, if that's what that's defined as, or is it just when, like seasonal flooding? If it even matters, I don't know.
I don't think that's what this ordinance addresses. I think this is consistent creek that has water running annually, consistently through it.
And that's why I was asking the term floodways there, so, okay, thank you.
Yeah, that becomes an engineering issue. I don't think you want citizens deciding what to do with floodways.
Yeah, that's why I was just asking why it's.
This is more just to monitor, maintain the quality of the creek.
Yeah, that
Right,
maintenance,
right,
I'm
make sure
assuming it's
cleaned out,
brushing, abating.
issues or whatever, yeah.
Make recommendations regarding use of the creek and cleaning and that type of thing.
I got a couple of questions there. So on page, first page where you struck out 2 and put 3, the commission shall consist of 5 members, 3 of which shall be residents of Ione. I'd like to see 4 of residents of Ione. And then I have the same question as Dan, how many of those 4, or even if you've got someone from the county, how many of those do you want to be on the creek? So it isn't exclusively everyone on the creek, but I'd for sure like to see 4 instead of 3. Then you've got officers over here, says any member of this commission may not hold any office. Is that any office in Ione, any office in the county, any office anywhere?
Any elected office?
Yeah, what is that? And that is also, is a planning commissioner an office? Can you be on the planning commission on the creek committee, or can you be on the parks? Can you be on the creek committee? So I think we need some definition on that. Meetings and time, it's very specific when they are. It just probably needs to say, like we do with the council meetings,
Quarterly.
usually held on the second Thursday, so that if there's a conflict and everybody agrees that they can do it on Tuesday, you can do it on Tuesday, instead of saying, well, we missed the second Thursday in January, so now the next one's going to be the second Thursday in April. I'd like to see something change on that, and that's all I got.
So the office issue is, right now, it's in the office, which would include a planning commissioner. That is a city office. A committee assignment is not an office,
So Parks is not on,
so that wouldn't be an office.
so it would be city council or planning commission on it.
Yes.
What section is that?
So if you
Yeah, where are you
limit
reading
it to
that?
elected offices, then you're not getting the
right
planning
here.
commission people.
What page are you reading that on?
Zero, that's the second page, 2.62060,
Officers?
Where it says officers.
any office, second line down. Highlighted, it's in the red.
Okay, we're gonna change that public works director to the clerk, right?
Correct.
That's what, I was looking for that too.
On the office, look, if you get somebody from the county who holds an office in the county, I don't know that that matters to you. So if you don't want to eliminate people that you may want on there, it could be hold any office within the city of Ione.
What's the purpose of that again? That don't make any sense to me. As example, my dad probably knows that creek better than anyone, and according to this, he could never be on that committee because.
He resigned his other commission.
Well, it's to stop, prejudgments. If it goes to the planning commission or goes to the city council.
But I'm on Parks, so.
That's not an office.
But you sit in that chair, so you
But
can't be
what's it,
there.
and this only refers to an advisory member of the commission, not the actual appointed commissioners, right?
What are you looking at?
The page, second page, 2.060, officers. There shall be 2 officers in the commission, a chairman, chairperson, and a vice chairperson. An advisory member of the commission may not hold any office. That to me says the only advisory and member of the commission that's designated is the city council person who's going to advise, right? That's not referring, it says
Yes.
advisory member, it's not referring to the actual members of the commission.
I'm looking at that and it's not clear to me, so I think we need to rewrite that section.
Right.
So because.
I think it's to keep the advisory
Right.
person from holding, from taking actual part in the commission.
Let's just say, from my suggestion would be that we include language that this is trying to define offices within the committee or commission itself. But it reads like none of the commissioners can hold an office if they're an officer of the city or county right now. I don't know that that's.
Yeah, I don't think it reads like that.
So I think this needs to be rewritten and come back in a form where we can have a more, because I'm looking at it, I'm going, oh, God, I can read this 2 ways.
You
I
wrote
hate
it.
that as a lawyer, so.
You do?
Yes, I do.
It's like the Parks Commission, they're not allowed to be officers either. So whatever it says in the Parks Commission one, just pull that one.
Yeah, and all it says is that
To me, it makes
our
sense,
Parks
too.
Commission advisor from the city council can't hold an office in the Parks Commission.
Right.
He is there simply to advise. He's not voting. he's
Right,
not-
right.
Okay,
And-
we'll clean that up.
Yeah. I believe that's what the intent of this is being.
And then on the dates, we'll work the language so it's more fluid and gives the commission authority to manage their own meetings.
And I would like to see 4 instead of 3 as well.
Oh, 4 on my own, yeah, 4 for my own.
And then on the very last item, which is E, it goes through recommended coordination of activities. The very, very last thing says Preston Youth Correctional Facility, which is kind of no longer there. I don't know if you want to put something else or just remove it, or
Yeah, let's strike it.
I don't think there's anyone living there right now anymore.
Hopefully,
Don't bet on it.
you never know. They do rounds out there, but.
Okay.
Okay, and that's again a non-action item.
This was just discussion, and we'll bring back an ordinance for first reading
Okay.
or another discussion.
Is there a public comment that would like to be made? It's not an action item, but
You get to hear me again.
we have time here this evening, so.
Well, Cal Saroon is our advisor to the mayor when I was on the Creek Committee.
I'm kind of, I didn't
I
catch
was
this.
on the creek committee, and Councilor Hume was, he was our advisor, he was the mayor. And a very good one, may I say that. And the thing about the creek, as he said, everybody owns it, they don't. I give Janice, my wife went up and looked at it. My property, the meat market, all the rest, clean as a thing, the city owns.
Correct, that's true.
And
Downstream.
down clean into Spring Creek, and Andy's here, and he went and looked, and there's a thing that was signed to the county where the creek is, they own it, but the city's responsible for it. It's actually, he's got the papers to prove that. So, they're supposed to be, in the downstream stuff, why there was 2 people on there, we affect the people downstream from us. When we clean the creek, or we used to clean the creek, you affect down, you just can't dump water on somebody's property. So that's why that was in there. Or they can't dump water onto us. That's why the city's in charge of that. It's been in charge of it forever. Thank you.
When Spring Creek was done, there was paperwork done. And everybody had to sign it when you bought the house. And I think even when you buy a house now, the county will give you the papers. And in one deal in there, it says the property owners, some of them own to the middle of the creek, and their responsibility is just to take care of their bank, you know? And they're not supposed to go out in the creek and clean it or anything. So more or less, it's probably the city. So I'll try to get the paperwork. I have some, but you can't see it. Next time I go up to the county, I'll see if they can make me a new one. And it's registered and everything. It
Is
has
that
a
for
lot-
Spring Creek, Andy?
Yeah, Spring Creek
Yeah,
subdivision.
Okay, because
Yeah.
at Edgebrook, you do own to the middle of the creek.
Yeah, a lot of the houses on Spring Creek own to the middle of the creek. But in the agreement that he made, I don't know if the city signed it or not, you're only actively responsible for just your little bank. You're not supposed to go out in the creek and clean it. And, first of all, you gotta get a deal from Fish and Game, a permit and Army Engineer Corps to clean the creek. So your city manager should start on that to get those permits. I don't know if they're free or what. We had them for a while. I don't know if they're canceled out now or not.
Well, that's what the creek committee's for.
Well,
Figure it all out.
okay, yeah, but the city manager should get all that stuff.
Well, that's what the city, why we're setting up the creek committee, so that we can determine all that, and we'll get that
You
started,
don't
so.
understand what I'm saying, is the creek's a mess.
Exactly.
Okay, if you were the city manager, you see it, wouldn't you start to, because I heard, I never have talked with CYA boys, and up there, they said they'd come and clean it. I don't know if you have to pay them or what. And nobody asks anybody, nobody does nothing.
Well, we're doing something, we're establishing the tree committee
Yeah,
again.
but what I'm saying is your city manager should have had been on top of this, that's what.
Well,
you're
it
paying
didn't
for.
happen, and so we're establishing the creek committee, Andy, that's what we're doing.
Yeah, but we get up here every year and tell that we're not, some of you guys are
Okay.
doing, nobody does anything.
All right, well,
You know,
now we're
that's-
doing something.
Yeah, but how far is it gonna go?
I don't know, Andy, we'll see.
The city manager should get on that and get all the permits.
Okay,
Andy, you can't do work in the stream when there's water in it.
Oh, I know that.
Well, but there's been water pretty much in it ever since I've been here.
Yeah, but you can get a permit, I think, to clean it, because up at Sutter Creek, they're cleaning the creek. Jackson, they
Okay.
clean the creek, so.
thank you. Okay, moving on to item number 7. Thank you letter to U.S. Mine Corporation.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, Council, at the last meeting, Council asked that a letter be drafted to U.S. Mine Corporation to thank them for the work that they did at the horse arena. Had the opportunity to talk to Allison LaFane, who's the manager there. She provided me with the information that is in the letter in terms of what they did, so I have drafted a letter for the mayor's signature.
Very good, looks good. Thank you, John.
Okay, again, non-action item, we're just going to move on to city manager reports. We don't need public comment for a non-action item. I've just been being
Awesome.
beneficent tonight.
But yeah, I have a number of things to kind of go through, kind of repeating ourselves here. Ceremony for Chief Mackey, 7 p.m. Thursday, November 21st at Fire Station Number 2. Also had the opportunity to do a presentation to the Amador County Board of Supervisors, and the city will be receiving almost $60,000 to assist with the construction of the tennis and basketball courts. We will begin the process of starting a RFP for council to review here shortly. Also still working on the Nexus study and the facility needs for the new Nexus update for 2020. One of the big issues that we're dealing with is level of service that we need to delineate for pretty much everything. Still waiting to hear on the state's per capita grant program for the train depot park. That was supposed to be heading to us here in the fall or earlier to late fall. We're now heading into winter, so we're keeping an eye on that, waiting for the state to provide us with direction. Again, as I talked about earlier, $200,000 should be the minimum that the city of Ione gets for that. Want to establish a wastewater committee meeting during the week of December 9th. So if the committee members would look at their calendars and get back to me, that would be great. Also want to establish a finance committee during the week of December 16th. So again, committee members, please look at your calendars and let me know what works for you. In terms of talking with April, we may need to re-examine our water efficiency landscape ordinance. We passed ours in 2010, and my understanding that there has been some revisions to those state statutes that we'll need to update. Also, as part of that program, I'm still working on staff reports. We're a little behind on those, but I should have them done by the end of the week. Axios Homes is moving forward with purchasing units 3, 4, and 5 of the Wildflower subdivision.
1, 2, and 3, isn't it?
Excuse me, 1, 2, and 3. I'm sorry. You're right. 1, 2, and 3 from Ken Lupton, and they've asked the city to review the draft assignment and assumption of the development agreement. Our attorney has reviewed that document, and it should be coming to council on December 3rd for basically your consent and approval in terms of the property being sold. We'll be doing our annual risk management review with our insurance JPA here middle of December, and we're continuing to move forward with the software update. And so far, I mean, we've only had what I'll call one difficult glitch that we were able to work through. However, you know, staff is still continuing to do training, so that process is moving forward. I believe the paying online is now up and running, so that's another option for citizens to move forward. And that's kind of what I have for now.
And so far, I talked to Lori the other day, there was about 20 or 25 people signed up on the online paying. So you go online, follow the links on our website, and you can pay automatically.
Okay, city council committee reports.
The Citizens Action Committee met on Tuesday. I was just curious. I know. Stacy, did you get a request to be there or invitation?
Yeah, I did.
Okay, just making sure. Okay,
Yeah.
I know the paper did too. They weren't there, obviously. We toured the coffee factory, and you missed a really good latte, man. And we got to meet the baristas, and it's actually a pretty neat program. I'm pretty impressed that they actually train some of the inmates at fairly high levels. There's only 3 places in the state where they train people to learn how to roast coffee, and they got some of the state most state-of-the-art equipment. I also discovered too that the city, as a government entity, is also allowed to purchase from the state, so we can buy really nice coffee here, Jana. So if you're interested, it's only to the public entities. And I learned that blonde roasts have more caffeine than dark roast, so you may already be in the know. But it was really good. There's probably 6 or 12 inmates in there. And another really interesting fact too, they say that if you let your coffee sit more than a minute, about 80% of your caffeine is right at the very top of your coffee. I learned lots about coffee. But they have a really good program there. The inmates do all the roasting, they do sampling. They actually get coffee shipped in from all over the world. They get case lot samples that comes in from the harbor down in San Francisco. They pull it out, and they said they'll find rocks and bolts and all kinds of stuff because it's per weight. But they can reject the bag too because it doesn't have the right quality of beans, mold, size, a bunch of stuff. But they get, when they're done, they can get like 3 or 4 certificates in coffee roasting, and they be really high dollar jobs once they get on the outside, when they graduate to beyond the other side of the gate there. They also had an update on the report for the wastewater. Right now they did smoke testing. The report's about 10,000 pages or so. They gave us kind of just a high level summary. It wasn't really much. They will be putting out a public statement here. It's forthcoming, and I invited them to come down to City Council. And I've talked to John, and the Mill Creek will come down and hopefully answer some questions. And we're also going to ask Regional Water Quality Control Board to come down, send somebody to give us their idea and what their thoughts on it are too. So at least we'll have some resolution there. And the population of the inmates, it was about 4,009, I believe, last time. Currently, it's about 4,059. It's gone up 50 inmates. And there's lots of acting personnel there. Almost everybody, from the warden to the fire chief to many of his lieutenants are almost all acting right now. And that process takes about a year to get through. So although acting staff members will be the full-blown members at the end of the process, it does take about a year to get through. So at some point, we will have an official warden, an official fire chief, and on down the line. And that is my report from the Citizens Action Committee.
I had AFPA, we had our usual running discussion and arguments about spending of Measure M money and what could be spent, what couldn't be spent. And it seems unresolvable unless we're willing to put out money for an attorney to solve it all, and we're not. So I think we'll just keep arguing about it every 3 months. So.
I wouldn't have in committee.
Okay, we are going to move to closed session for conference with legal counsel pursuant to Government Code Section 54956.9D.
Did you skip comments?
Yeah, you skipped one.
I'm sorry,
Oh,
I checked it off.
I want to take
Okay, we're going to hold off on the closed session.
Mr. Mayor.
We'll have city council comments and future agenda items. And we'll start at this end.
I just want to bring up again, I want to make sure golf course gets water. I haven't heard anything yet of what's going to happen with that. We've brought this up I don't know how many times. There was some discussion about possibly the well, how he's going to get water. So we just keep being told, don't worry about it, it's no problem. But I'd like to see something in some sort of writing that at least someone's working on it. The other thing is, when I came in here, I went, to back up. A couple of months ago, we all kind of voted and agreed on putting up maps, drawings of certain things of the town. So I went up and I put out an email saying, I'd like to see this happen. If no one will do it, I'll jump on board. So I went up to Staples and I bought an aerial photo of the sewer plant. So I printed it out, gave it to John, so you guys will have something to hang on the wall. I'm gonna do the next one of an aerial of Howard Park, so when there's discussion on that, especially at parks, people don't even know what we're talking about half the time, and we're pointing at that thing, so I'm doing that, so I
Sounds great,
hope
Stacy.
that you have that map up, or that drawing, picture up on the wall the next time you have your sewer committee.
Right now.
I'd just like to see we gotta move forward with the parking lot that we've been trying to buy for, 3 years? So I'd like to see that on a future, agenda item.
and just to kind of give you, I had a conversation with Loretta last time I gave a presentation to the Rotary Club and asked her where she was in getting the easements all recorded. And she was one of those that she was going to get to, so she still knows that we're interested. I will prod her again in terms of getting that to move forward.
Okay, now we're going to move to closed session. Conference with legal counsel pursuant to Government Code Section 54956.9D, pending litigation in regards to national prescription opiate litigation. And also conference with legal counsel, anticipated litigation, Government Code Section 54956.92D in one case.